You may not notice it, but there is a ticking time bomb in Final Fantasy XIV right now, and when Dawntrail releases, it's going to explode. With every new expansion that releases, we not only see the advent of a handful of brand new jobs, but also a few that are removed entirely. You might be thinking that I am talking crazy, but let me give you an example. So, when Endwalker released a few years ago, they added the healer Sage to the game, alongside the melee DPS Reaper, and it was a great time all round, right? Well, turns out that expansion was pretty unbalanced, because they also added a second melee DPS in the form of Monk, a new caster DPS in Summoner, and midway through the expansion they even treated us to a brand new tank in the form of Paladin. In what has become a per-expansion tradition at this point, numerous jobs are reworked from the ground up in order to appeal to more players or to better fit the job fantasy that Final Fantasy XIV developers envision for it, and we are fast approaching that time once more. Two jobs which have officially been earmarked by Square Enix as in the firing line for full reworks come Dawntrail are Dragoon and Astrologian. If you main either of these jobs, you can fully expect that a year from now, you're going to be playing something completely different than what you can log in and do roulettes on right now. And whether that idea sparks joy or not is very debatable. Today, we are going to talk about what we can expect to see for both of these jobs, what I'm hoping for, and what negative aspects we might see as a result of the reworks. But before we can look forward, we need to look back. When Endwalker released, Monk and Summoner received full reworks to their rotations and gameplay styles to, incredibly mixed receptions. Summoner had cemented a position for itself previously as a job that combined a bunch of different components that you had to juggle in order to be successful. Whilst the quote-unquote summoning aspect of the job fantasy took a little bit of a backseat, many people that mained Summoner at the time were incredibly passionate about it because of its deep rotational versatility, and because they had a little bit of a thing for being a juggler on a tightrope with a boss on the sidelines throwing bricks at them. You'd see images like these floating around, alongside hushed whispers of the 2-minute rotation, with tons of per-flight changes to get the most out of your abilities. In Endwalker, it turned to this. Instead of harkening back to what came before, all of that was trimmed down in favour of a job that was, on the plus side, incredibly aesthetically appealing and had excellent job fantasy. Your core rotation loop focused almost entirely on shuffling primal summons for a handful of GCDs apiece, with not much fluff or filler. Things were so simplified that Summoner, one of Final Fantasy's caster jobs, barely spent 1/5 of its time casting. Instead, it's been memed to death that it has become a glorified range DPS with a 1-button rotation. You do your Bahamut, where you 1-1-1-1-1, then you pick a shiny Lego, then another, and then lastly you use the third one. Then you get to Phoenix 1-1-1-1, and rinse repeat. That's the core of the job. Whilst many of the original Summoner mains fled to greener pastures because they were immensely disappointed with what had happened to their favourite job to play, a number of newer players that had previously found the job intimidating, boring, or both suddenly had a brand new version of Summoner to try out and fall in love with, a comfy new role to play. On a little side note, Summoner is a job that regularly receives sweeping changes because it felt like the developers just were not sure exactly what they wanted to do with it. So I'm really curious if this version will stay mostly the same next expansion. Like, if this version is close to Summoner's final form at last. Monk had a big metamorphosis too, in that it was another job that Square Enix was constantly changing in large ways, once or twice per expansion. And this time around, it seems to have stuck mostly untouched for 5 patches in a row. And because, honestly, I really enjoy current Monk quite a lot, I kind of hope that this structure sticks around into Dawntrail. One Endwalker job which followed a different pattern, however, is Paladin. This tank entered the expansion in mostly the same form it's had for half a decade. A standard 1-2-3 tank with a casting or ranged phase, with dot uptime from Goring Blade to manage as one of the key job components. People liked Paladin, people enjoyed it, and yet with the changes to raid buffs and job damage profiles, it had been left out to dry. Its niche had all but been eliminated. There was not a place for jobs that did relatively consistent damage without a big burst cycle on the 60 or 120 seconds. So, in order to help spike up play rates and performance, something had to give. What gave in the end was shifting Paladin's rotation to something more akin to the way that other tanks play right now, in that they have a major damage spike on the 1 minute window via their now dotless scoring blade and Confiteor combo, and aside from a few simple rules, the rotation in between those windows does not really matter. For some people, this was transformative in a positive way, whereas for others, it scuffed a job that had made them passionate into something that was just the same as all the others. As a healer main who at various points in the past has actually mained Astro, I know, shocking, I'm pretty publicly an Astro unenjoyer, but yes, I have mained Astro in the past. I have pretty mixed feelings about the impending rework. The job is in a very Marmite spot right now, in that you either absolutely love it and nothing else in the game compares, or the only thing you want to do is crunch that job stone into dust and swap back to White Mage. I could make an entire video on how current Astro's healing is so engaging that it actually doesn't really fit into the current unengaging climate of FF14 healing. And maybe I will if people are interested, but the cliff notes of the job, in my opinion, are that the DPS is... yeah... The healing's fun, deep and brilliant on the whole, and the card system can be very rewarding with a lot of depth for high skill players. But on the whole, the job is a bit of a Frankenstein's beast right now of ill-fitting systems being slotted on top of one another, purely for the sake of not removing them. Maybe going from the ground up once again is what Astro really needs to shine. That said, Astro and White Mage currently have something special that the two shield healers are not able to claim. They're very different from one another. Scholar and Sage could never. I really hope in Dawntrail that we don't lose them. I'm expecting to see the Astrodyne system completely gutted, and honestly, I believe it's for the best. Cards might stay the way they are right now, and I would honestly be okay with that on the whole, but it's tradition at this point for cards to get reworked in basically every expansion in some way, so it wouldn't surprise me at all to see it be shifted in some way, shape, or form. Heck, maybe someone will get a little too high after overtime and put spread balance back into the game and truly cause some chaos. Additionally, my expectation is that the healing kit will see some adjustment. Astro has an incredibly strong healing portfolio when it comes to planned healing, but if it's recovering off of a death or it needs to improvise in PF situations, it can become very difficult to manage very quickly. This leads to it being pretty awkward at times in pug scenarios, and I think in Dawntrail they're going to keep some of those trademark abilities like Earthly Star and Macrocosmos, but shift to having more simple, what you see is what you get heals. But my opinion isn't the only one that matters. What are other Final Fantasy XIV players saying? I went to the bastion of common sense and calm conversation on the internet, Reddit, to see for myself.
I mean, the last massive rework they did was SMN, and they completely lobotomized the job, so I'd say Dread. Ast gets reworked like every expansion in terms of card system, but this one seems different. I just hope they make the card system feel more impactful than it does now.
AST in its current iteration to me is very unrewarding to play. Burning Arcana Gauge for personal buff as opposed to it being tied to DIV feels like a waste, and it's better to pull cards and play into 2-minute raid buffs rather than aim for 3 seals. Don't even get me started on how RNG Lord and Lady are. If we talk about parsing for example, one literally has to pray to get Lord every minute, otherwise DPS goes to shite, and in those situations extra healing isn't needed at all, since all healing is probably planned to a GCD.
Dragoon's rework being confirmed genuinely stunned me though. It's my favourite melee DPS and one of my favourite jobs in the game on the whole, and overall, it still has a fairly respectable play rate on average, beating Monk in terms of melee DPS popularity. It's a job that, in my opinion, decently covers a bunch of aspects of Dragoon's traditional job fantasy. It has a fun and decently engaging rotation with a lot of small opportunities for optimization, and yet it's very simple to execute at a base level. And it looks cool too. I thought that it had all the elements that come together to make a pretty well designed job on the whole. I remember being confused about this, so I asked my stream chat, and the majority of the feedback that I got related to action bloat and the 2-minute windows being too hectic. And after more thought, I can somewhat agree. Why does the job have 2 charges of Spine Shatter? Why does it need 2 life surges? What does this offer than just another required double weave? The 2-minute window may be fun to me, but I can also understand how it might be fairly overwhelming. And I can also understand how people might find the rotation somewhat stagnant. I could see them removing those second charges, bringing the jumps onto the GCD rather than having them as off-global abilities, and reworking how the job's burst window works on the whole. I'd be a little surprised if Life of the Dragon operates the same way it does now in 7.0, aside from the fact that Nostrand and Stardiver will still exist there in some form or another. I'm gonna miss Endwalker Dragoon, honestly. And if you will too, make sure to give our boy a good send-off in the coming months. Let's hear what the internet has to say.
As someone who started on Dragon and got in all classes to 90, I'm a little worried for Dragon. The recent high jump adjustment was nice in 6.4, but I'm worried about how it's going to change because I don't want it to become a boring 1-2-3 in a burst phase like her PR is. I play her PR when I don't want to think in Dragon, when I actually want to be engaged during a fight.
So what do you think? What I'd really love to see in the comments today is what you would like to see changed, added, or removed from Dragoon or Astro. How do you feel about these impending reworks? Are you happy? Are you molding? Are you completely uninterested? Let me know, I would really like to hear from you. Whatever ends up happening though, it's nice to think about the fact that we actually get 4 new jobs next expansion, right? Maybe even 5 if they decide to do a mid-expansion rework again. Pretty good. Have a fantastic rest of your day. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next week with another video.